Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. How's everyone? I am so excited this morning to be here, accompanied by my two amazing co-hosts, Jorden Geiger from Black Lives Matter South Bend, and Bella D'Alacio from March for Our Lives. We're here for another episode of our series, All Neighbors, New Dialogue, in the Lead to the Peace Summit, where we explore and reflect on the history and current realities that have made Mexico and the U.S. more than neighbors, and also to talk about the importance of bringing the people from both countries together this year to speak with one voice for peace and justice. This is why we have been getting ready together to bring hundreds of leaders, activists, and advocates from both countries, Mexico and the US, to hold online and in-person dialogues starting this next Saturday, 24, in the Bronx in New York, where Jorden and Bella and Melissa and so many other amazing leaders will be here on February 23rd, and to start and kick off this amazing process of online and offline discussions that will end in a peace summit in Mexico City on February 23rd, 2023, to build the people's binational agenda that we need to stop the historic and regional policy of putting profit before people and bring a different future for us. To learn more about the different events coming to your city, please go to peacesummit2023.org. We're so excited that people have been very responsive. We have forums in Florida, in San Francisco, in obviously New York next week. We're going to have forums in Tijuana, San Diego, in Mexico City, and other 5 states in Mexico. So this is becoming a new moment for the people after the pandemic to come together, because we in the end are all suffering from the same crisis. But before we jump to today's topic, which is amazingly interesting, I would like to ask Jorden and Bella, how are they doing? How are they feeling today? And if there's anything in the news that they would like to share with our audience.
Hi, Marco. Thank you again for having us. I'm doing great today. I think one thing that's worth sharing is the complete humanitarian issue that happened with the immigrants in Texas and Florida, where the governors sent them on a bus and told them that they had opportunities and jobs waiting for them. And I believe when they got there, nobody knew where they were coming, and there was like a lot of chaos. I'm not entirely sure about the story, but it was just completely messed up, and a direct attack on our immigrant families. So that's something I would like to, talk about and hear your opinions. And hi, Jorden.
Nah.
Hey, good afternoon. I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, and I think I even saw something yesterday that said they like sent folks to like Kamala Harris's home, which is just wild. What I've been reading in the news and kind of following is just the concerns and anxieties around a potential global recession in 2023, and thinking about what impact that will have on our communities. I mean, we've seen what the pandemic brought in terms of an uptick in violence, increase in suicides, folks struggling with like the mental health. So in light of all of that, what will come as a consequence of a global recession? So that's kind of at the forefront of my mind. And, even just like locally, I know FedEx has been doing like a ton of hiring, but there was some sort of internal memo or something that was leaked that said like the CEO of FedEx is planning to cut jobs, and all of that, that comes with a recession. And so I'm just thinking about like what impact this will have on our communities next year.
Sure. I mean, trying to connect both pieces of information. I would say number one, obviously, it's enraging the level of inhumanity that we've reached in the U.S. and with this games of sending immigrants to places that where they don't know absolutely anyone at all, and just for the sake of making a point. These families that are showing up or that are being bused and sent to places like New York, Chicago, or Martha's Vineyard are alive. So they are children, they're mothers, they're families who are running away from harsh conditions, and that under the current U.S. law have been accepted as asylum seekers. And then instead of welcoming them, we're unwelcoming them and sending them up to a place that many times is on the opposite corner where they were trying to reach, where they have a loved one or where they have a community waiting for them. And so they are basically, many of these individuals, many of these families, many of these children would end up being homeless by not knowing anyone where they are showing up. And if it's not for the help of local communities, and even many times cities like New York, where I am, which is have always called itself a sanctuary city. They didn't know what to do. They were overwhelmed with the presence of immigrants. They were upset, and instead of immediately extending their arms and putting resources, they were freaking out, and they were running around trying to figure out a way to send them back to Texas. It's just a stupid game where people are losing. America's losing. The United States is losing every day the opportunity of growing up. These, again, are families that are under our current system, is our legal asylum seekers. There are people who are, as many millions of asylum seekers that have come into this country throughout history. So we are definitely taking steps back. We are going to pre-Civil War times where this nonsense, it's taking the first lines of our current political battle, and it's so sad. Yet at the same time, we have this huge risk of a new global recession, where we should be thinking how to unite, how to think together as one, as people who have been always affected by these policies, and instead of that, we're choosing to fight among each other. Florida, Ron DeSantis, and many Floridans are Latinos. There's a huge Latino population there, and we should be discussing about how do we save ourselves from this post-pandemic horrible economic crisis instead of playing these games.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Bella?
I think that was completely well said. I'm from Florida. My family, they all came from Cuba as asylum seekers. So to me, this hits home. I think that, Florida and Miami especially have such a beautiful community of immigrants, and we all rely on each other. And we have, just such an amazing community where people are able to still meet with people that they love from where they came from, and connect and still uphold their culture. And to see this direct attack on these Americans is just entirely messed up. It's a humanitarian crisis. And I really hope that, we can vote these people out in November. So that's my goal.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing that work, because definitely Florida and many parts of Florida have been taken by the lies, taken hostage by the lies from conservative groups that have planted the seeds of hate and racism, and reality is calling for a new movement, and that's why we're here. So I wanted to share with you a piece of history that was published on history.com. It's an article from from January 29th, 2021. And the article is called "The Little Known Underground Railroad That Ran South to Mexico." It's a really interesting and powerful piece of history that I'm going to be sharing in the chat and YouTube and Facebook in a minute. But it's an amazing piece of history that reminds us that the Underground Railroad ran south as well as north. And for enslaved people in Texas, refugee in Canada must have seemed impossibly far away. But fortunately, slavery was also illegal in Mexico. So researchers estimate that 5,000 to 10,000 people escaped from bondage into Mexico, according to academics, and an academic who's writing her dissertation about this topic at the University of Texas at Austin. But she thinks that the actual number could be even higher. This clandestine routes, and if you got caught on this clandestine routes, you would be killed and lynched. So most people didn't leave a lot of records. So this piece is full of interesting facts that remind us that Mexicans sided with those who were enslaved, and that could have been one of the main reasons why Texas separated itself from Mexico and then ended up joining the U.S. But Mexico stood in its principle of making slavery illegal, and those are pieces of history that we don't share every day. And Jorden and I were talking about how important it is to talk about this, not in here, but in schools, for example. What do you think about that, Jorden?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really, important just for myself as a, someone who identifies as a Pan-Africanist and an abolitionist, and to learn about Vicente Guerrero and, his efforts to end the practice of slavery in 1829 in Mexico, which allowed for, other people of African descent to come into Mexico to try to realize a freedom. I just think it's important. And, we know within the last decade or so, Afro-Mexicans have been fighting in the state to gain recognition on the census so that they can be counted, so that the world can know that, people of African descent live in Mexico. There's a long history. You can go back to Gaspar Yanga. So all of that is just important. And we have to have these conversations so we can understand how our fates are interconnected. You're muted, Marco.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but in recent years, we've seen a growing flow of Afro-Caribbeans and people from Haiti trying to reach the U.S., but because of Trump policies, they ended up being, finding themselves stranded at the border. And throughout time, they've been, many of them have been settling in northern states in Mexico, in states like in cities like Tijuana.
Right.
You see a growing community of people from Haiti, and as part of our forums in the lead to the Peace Summit, we're going to be in Tijuana on December 2nd and 3rd, and it's going to be amazing to see us coming together and having Jorden meet folks from Asian Breach Alliance and finding ways on increasing solidarity between those of us who are not usually represented in our history books. And how do we start, to build and honor this historic alliances and solidarity that it's been denied and marginalized from our history. So, yeah, really interesting piece. It's in the chat. Please check it out. And it's another important reason to have spaces like this. But so jumping into today's topic, which we are so excited about, let me just give you a brief introduction. For many decades, we've been told, also in history books, that Mexico and the U.S. are two different countries. And many times we read about how different we are. In Mexico, for example, we think of the U.S. as a mainly white nation that tries always to take advantage of the countries south of its border. But not very often, if not never, we talk about how we share a history and a territory where Indigenous people, Native Americans, and First Nations have lived for over thousands of years before the white man showed up. These communities share a past with a very different form of life where there was not such thing as national borders, for example.
Right.
But these communities also share the struggles of the present. Many of these communities are fighting up to this day to, be recognized, represented, and to protect their territories, even though they are the real historic, legal, and political owners of the land where we are currently standing. So, to talk about this, we are very, very pleased. We're honored to have two amazing leaders of the Native American movement and the Mexican Indigenous peoples movement. And so, please let me welcome our hosts, and Bella, it's going to introduce them to us.
I'm so happy to introduce our hosts. So first off, we have Melissa Akoi Hanae Oaks. She's a Mohawk woman from the Snipe clan. She resides in Akko West Asni Mohawk territory, where she was born and raised, and New York City. She is trained in Northern and Southern tribal art, fashion, business, politics, and leadership, completing multiple degrees and certifications, and studied in Montreal, New York City, Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong. At an early age, she experienced Canadian Army tanks in her backyard, blockades on her street, and no school due to military occupation on her reservation territory for months at a time. From the Oka crisis to Idle No More, the Two Row Wampum renewal campaign, and No DAPL, Melissa has been active from the day that she was born. She has stood and been part of the Mohawk Warrior Society since inception. Through the American Indian Community House and multiple venues, she furthers her commitments through targeted actions, open dialogues, teaching, and solution-driven programming. And our other wonderful speaker that we have today is Annabella Carlin Flores. She's a lawyer from the Yaqui tribe in Mexico. Her town, Loma de Bacum, is resisting an oil pipeline that the transnational Ainova is trying to build through her territory without the consent of the community. Despite the official requirement by the local authority that the company cease any construction activity within Loma de Bacum, construction continues. Annabella has been threatened because of her opposition, and in December 2016, she was kidnapped along with her husband.
Thank you very much to Bella and both of our invited speakers today. Annabella is joining us from her community, and so she's having some issues with internet. She was already here, and we suddenly lost her, and we're trying to get her back. In the meantime, I would like to start by asking Melissa, obviously, thank you and welcome, Melissa. And we'd like to ask you, why don't you share with us a little bit of your experience growing up as a Native American in the United States of America?
Sure. Sego, everybody. Thank you for having me. My experience. Well, for one thing, where I live on my reservation, we actually are located on a border. So the Canadian and the US border runs straight through our reserve. So we are split between like two different provinces and New York State. So Quebec, Ontario, and New York State. So there's a lot of jurisdictional issues and a lot of different, I guess, government factions that have to be dealt with, both provincially, state, and federally from both sides. So it gets really complicated, particularly when we're fighting for something. And throughout my bio, there was mention of like fighting the Oka crisis and having to deal with military occupation. That was something that we dealt with on the Canadian side of the border, actually where I am right now. And that was around when I was maybe like 10 years old, maybe. So there was literally like the army was here. It was like flooding our reservation, the Mohawks, and then they were also flooding and bombarding Ganawage, which is another Mohawk territory right beside Montreal, and the Mercier Bridge, and then Ganasadage, which is known as Oka. So it was always around land and always around rights and authority and stewardship. And it gets really difficult when we have our people are sort of split between colony and tradition, and like who we really are. So like with traditional people, we have our own governance, right? It's literally like the Haudenosaunee or also known as the Iroquois are known as the originators of the blueprint for the United States Constitution, right? So that came from us. So we know governance. It was high functioning prior to colonization, and as we've pushed through to this day. So when dealing with any battles, particularly in Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is where I am from, one of the 6 nations, the Mohawk Nation, also known as Kanien'kehá:ka. There's just like internal issues, conflicts with trying to agree with like these different sort of philosophies that are based on foundations of capitalism and or like collective, like greater good, which would be more traditional, capitalism being more colony, and usually the Ungwehue, the natives that follow the church, their tradition. Um, so growing up, I've always dealt with seeing those 2 sides of things, the way they function, the way they conflict, and sort of like navigating my way through all of it, through religion, church, traditions, longhouse, and where I am today, pretty much, was listening to the elders, the traditional elders, valuing that first because that's who I am and where I'm from. So having to dig deep, and it's also something that's not available publicly, so or taught in schools for us, as another form of like genocide. And so it was really growing up. It is very political. It was highly political. We'll never argue that it's not. I would say our existence as Ungwehue is one of the most political stances that any BIPOC, set of people have dealt with. Maybe not in a successful way, but in a way that's like, we've been fighting since day one, and we're still fighting just like other people. But for us, it's like we're on our land, so there's that argument. And that's kind of undeniable. So it's a little bit of leverage when it comes to maintaining who we are and who our children will grow up to be, and how our next generations will know themselves to be. So I don't know. It's a lot. I kind of forgot your question, but I guess growing up, right? It's very political. That's all I have to say. I've been through so many different battles. I feel like I've learned more from those than I probably have in school. We'll put it that way. Yeah.
Absolutely, I am sure. And if you want, before I hand it over to Jorden because he had a really interesting question. You have had the opportunity during the pandemic of getting to know folks in Mexico and indigenous communities living in New York, and you were even invited to attend a celebration in Mexico City at the commemoration of 500 years of resistance, indigenous resistance, by the presidency of Mexico. What has been your relationship with indigenous folks? Is it something organic? It has happened all the time. Is it something new? How is that?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a lot. You might want to put that in a chat. So my relationship with the indigenous from Mexico, from the South, started with you, Marco, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So dealing with a lot of like, I guess just like me having a general knowing of, the community, but not having any access or any, I don't know, not it's when you see something on TV, you think, "Oh, it's horrible," or that's bad, these kids are in cages. But then when you meet the people and you spend time with them, it humanizes them, and it's not that I ever dehumanized them in my mind, but I was just always, really concerned about people that I know that my people should be really connected to, that would be considered our brothers and sisters, of the South. and just like watching everything that was happening at the border. It was very hurtful. But then to be able to spend time with the community, it really meant a lot to me. And really also kind of like hurt to see what they were going through. And just myself, I was trying to figure out different ways I could help, whether it be through like programming and arts and culture, or like activism, or like empowerment, or just standing alongside and supporting when I can. Kind of like how I am here today. Um, but somehow it ended up being last year when I was invited for that 500-year commemoration,
Mhm.
and being in contact with the president's office. And they invited me a few times to a few things, and I was kind of like, whoa, what is this? This is kind of cool, but a lot of things are happening, and I don't know if that if that government is doing everything they can for their people. So that was also a little bit concerning for me. I couldn't make it because of COVID, I couldn't renew my passport, so I couldn't make it. But I wanted to make sure that, the initial intention was still there. And I want to make sure another Mohawk went down there to represent. So I got a little bit pushy. I was like, I want to send somebody as like a proxy, somebody in my place. And it'll be great. I assure you, this is the person, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, that's going to happen. So when I did that, I made that also very political with the person that I sent, or asked to go, and they agreed. They're a newly appointed first Grand Chief in Canada to be Two Spirit. Uh, her name was Sky Deer. So she went down, and when she brought down, well, I guess it was literally like the week after she was like appointed in her position, the week after election. Um, and so I caught them when they were busy, right? And they're like, she just was like, yes, I can squeeze it in. I was like, we'll fly you in, and then we'll fly you right out if you need to, So it's just a time of excitement. And I think it's something that is an even bigger deal than it might have felt like at the time. I think throughout history and in the future, when we look back and we see that sort of like reconnection happened. When she went down there, she spoke. I sent a speech down to read, and I don't know where that speech is, but maybe I'll get it to you, Marco. But I
We heard
had
it. I saw it and I heard it.
yeah, there was some really like, hard points in there that, I just, poetically shoved in there. But to me, what was most symbolic was that, one, it was a Two-Spirit Mohawk chief that went down there for the 500-year commemoration to reconnect the Mohawk people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy back to Mexico, the indigenous in Mexico, and the government. And she gave them the Ganasueta belt. That's the two-row wampum belt, which is really, a major symbol of, I guess, just reconnection. And it has like a message in it that, there's like these two purple rows of wampum that represent the ship and the canoe, and the ship is the colony and capitalism, and the canoe is Ungwehue, is native people, Haudenosaunee people or native people. And we're not supposed, the agreement is to not disrupt the other or interfere with the other's culture or life ways. And the white wampum is like the water. So that was gifted. And that's a pretty big deal. So that's there somewheres with the president. And yeah, I mean, I felt like that was probably one of the biggest things that I've accomplished with our relationship that will, hopefully be a marker in the future when we look back at history, So yeah, it was great.
It was. So Yakowin is being very, very humble, as she's always with us. But I do want to mention that many indigenous folks who have come to New York and have made New York their home in the past decade have found themselves really isolated and alienated by white Mexicans that have taken obviously the main stage. And they've been always, you know, seen as Latinos in general, this big bag where so many identities are being put or placed in. And so they've been struggling to navigate and find their own voice in a city like New York. But it's been through the support of people like Akoi, well, basically her, that we've been able to, you know, find a voice in this city. And that's why during the pandemic, we were capable of joining forces between her and the Transnational Villages Network to provide thousands of meals for indigenous folks in the Bronx, and we were able to, you know, make these connections with the what was happening in Mexico. And so we're really thankful with your work, Iacowine, and we're looking forward for this coming sessions and forums where we're going to build more alliance and continue to strengthen this movement. And as part of that, Annabella is one of the most amazing and powerful leaders, advocates for the Yaqui tribe, who's like really at the border on the other side to where you are. She's at the border between Mexico and the U.S., fighting also against pipelines and all these different projects to satisfy the needs of the U.S. side at the expense of destroying historic communities. And she's been at the front lines. She's been incarcerated for speaking up. Many of the community peers have been unfortunately assassinated. And so that's why we think that it's very important to have her with us. Unfortunately, she continues to struggle with her internet. She's coming in and out. I'm going to continue to call her, even if it's in a regular call. But in the meantime, also Jorden had a question that he wanted to ask. Please, Jorden.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I wish Annabella could be here, and I hope this is an appropriate question to ask. But, you know, I'm aware that there are like tensions that exist between Indigenous and Latinx, or more specifically Mexican communities, due to like interlocking colonial histories. And so I'm just curious, like, what are the ways in which these communities can work together to disrupt the flow of guns into communities in order to address widespread gun violence? I know just from like my conversations with friends who are from Mexico, they often talk about like the conditions in which Indigenous people live, you know, in the country. Even though in many places they're a majority, they are some of the poorest folks, you know, in the state. And so, you know, just aware of just just that complex history, right? Of like Spain as that colonial, you know, force, and then, you know, Indigenous folks and mestizos working together to oust, you know, Spain. And yet now we have, you know, the dynamics that exist today. I'm just curious, in your mind, like how can these communities like work to mitigate those the tension that exists? I don't know if that's like a super complex question or loaded question.
Is that to me?
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I wish Annabella was here. Like, I don't want this all to be on you. Yeah, it's a huge question.
That's what I thought we're trying to figure out here.
Right.
I'm aware, like for me, that's what we're trying to figure out, right?
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, it should be made clear that like there's not really there's like surface tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's only surface tension because nobody has access to go deeper when it comes to these other communities. And that's part of design. That's part of the system. And it's also, you know, to keep Black and brown people and Indigenous people to keep us struggling and in survival mode. So, you know, everything's a threat when you're in that state of mind, right? To one degree or another, you know. Even if you're well off, but you're an Indigenous woman and working in politics, I'm still under threat to some extent, You know what I mean? Even when other people who might be advocating to do the same thing I'm doing for their people, that's kind of still a threat to me because I'm struggling to maintain whatever,
Right.
reach I can get to accomplish what I'm doing. So this is all by design, is what I'm trying to say. And like reservations are another example of that. For natives, we're all separated on reservations because we're stronger together, right? So they want to separate us and put us on badlands where there's like, these chosen parts of land to keep us on, basically caged in on, that lack resources that maybe colony, would want for themselves. So even up till I think like the 70s, natives had to have a pass. They
Right.
had to apply for a pass to leave the reservation. They couldn't hunt anymore. They couldn't hunt or fish freely. They could not grow food freely. They're dependent on government boxes with horrible food. That's like, the cause of like why all our people have diabetes and health issues, like with like government cheese and like flour and spam and just garbage, So then we're sick. We're sick and struggling now. And the integrity is broken down because we can't do all the things that are natural for us to do, like hunt, fish, and grow food. We can't provide for ourselves. So then that integrity and that part of the spirit dies. And then, so like traveling through colony, a couple, a few generations later to today, trying to people are really trying to struggle and really identify deeply with their identity, but they can't because they don't have access to all of these things the same way in which we don't have access to each other in these deeper ways of like, say, like trade or of like, ceremony or, just general relations of our people being migratory and being in how do you call it, just being good neighbors, from my land to your land, being good neighbors, bringing gifts, having ceremony, all of those things they're gone. Now like we have like, surface gatherings, but there's no depth because we don't have access to all the things that are natural to us and our identity. And I think it starts there, in regaining that, and empowering the individuals for the greater good, and bringing that spiritual integrity back that's in relation to the land and to nature and all the things that were created for us, not created for us, but created with us as like a family, as like a kinship. That union isn't happening anymore. As a people, we're currently living on the surface,
Right.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just like, I'm just trying to say how I see things and experience them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
Beautifully
much.
said. Thank you.
And maybe Bella want to comment something, but I would like to take the opportunity that we have Anabella here on the phone, so she's ready to jump in to share with us her message. Anabella, please, we can hear you, and if you wanna tell you what's your analysis on the relationship between Native American communities, indigenous people in Mexico.
Thank you for inviting me to this dialogue to reflect about our struggles and the common causes we face as indigenous people, and something that is like very common in the relation with our neighbors is we feel them as sisters and brothers, because when there is a movement in Mexico or in the United States with the United Americans or native people, maybe from far away, we will send good energy if we cannot be there, because we cannot go to borders freely like before, so we cannot be like easily there. But when the native people from the United States want to do or say something, it's more easy for them to come this way and support our movement. And as this has been happening, sometimes when we have a big movement, we see some of them here accompanying the movement, or we have been seeing them like raising money to help the movement also. But what we have seen, or what we grow up seeing, is the result of historical injustice with the possession of land, territory, and resources, facing discrimination, stigmatization, and violence in many ways. We have seen this in both sides. And when there is a big mega project, we see our brothers and sisters big mostly in the United States or in the native territories, and they are very strong. And we see our movement like, oh, what a big movement there is going on there. But then we realize that there are other conditions. I don't know if to say better or not, but look like it. And I can say that it's a kind of good relation that we have with them. We well, at this point, I have not known any other native person from the United States being on the side of the companies that are going to convince or people negotiate or land or resources. Most of the time, I see support from them to our people in Mexico, or indigenous people. Eso puedo decir.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much, Anabella. Please stay here with us. What Anabella it's sharing with us by phone. I don't know if you heard everything that she said, but mainly, despite 500 years of indigenous communities being divided by borders, they continue to know that they exist. They acknowledge the existence of indigenous people in the United States, and as well, they know that they have the support of the people in the US. We might not get together as often as possible, and we might have not been able to build a movement that we need on both sides, but we do know that we support each other. Anabella mentioned that in her fight against the pipeline, they've received support from indigenous communities who have fundraised for them. And in the negotiations that they are currently going through with the company, she has never seen folks from the Native American community, coming on the side of the company. The company has tried to recruit Native Americans as negotiators, but they have not seen them so far. And instead of that, all that they've been getting from Native American communities in the US have been support. She wishes that the movement was stronger. She wishes that we were more, working in alliance across borders. But, she thinks that that's what we should be looking into. Annabella, anything you want to ask our panelists today?
Yeah. So I understand that this is an incredibly multifaceted issue. But I'm just wondering, is there one thing in this conversation that you think people tend to overlook completely, never ask about? What is one thing that you would just really want to draw attention to, a perspective that's not really shared?
Do you, Melissa, have an opinion?
of this conversation, perspective.
Something has been overlooked whenever we talk about this kind of issues.
I think it would be developing our relations between Indigenous from Mexico and from the North. Like not just supporting each other, but maybe converging in a way where there's like, some sort of like rekindling or like around culture and ceremony and politics and issues and power. I think that needs to happen. And again, I thought that's what we're doing here. I mean,
Yes.
I'm here because like I'm not sure if this is something that would spark interest for most Native leaders in the US, because they're all battling their own things, or trying to develop in ways specific for their nations. But I think to a certain extent, things have to happen in a like caring and loving and positive way to begin those relationships, or to rekindle those relationships from north into south. And then we carry on with the things where we need support in major ways that are detrimental to our futures, that sort of can come later. But first things first, we can't just expect somebody to jump in and fight, and we haven't even shaken hands yet, or met each other, or have any relationship together. So I think it's relation building is what everybody overlooks, and I think that's part of American society, and the norms and culture around entitlement. Even some of us carry it, but not in a way that not purposely, like within Indigenous communities, but you know we can't just shout like you support, you're either on our side or you're not, you're the enemy. We can't just do like assume those things. But we do have to put in the work that we would with others, the same work that we would want them you know to work towards developing a relation with us. It has to go two ways. And yeah, it's for me, that's always what it is there's a lack of relationship building. That would be what I would want to highlight here. And with this peace summit, hopefully this will spark that interest for the years to come. Hopefully it's something annual, and then we can bring in more and more Native Americans from within the US and Canada, and we can really converge and realize what that power holds on Turtle Island. Maybe you can self-actualize that at some point. But we're here today, and I think I'm like one of the only factions of American Indian from the US and Canada right now. I'm split down the middle on both sides, so you got a 2-for-1 with me.
Mm, that is,
But
that is. Thank you, Melissa. I would also add that sometimes also we tend to overlook, the role of women, Indigenous women. And also the role of Indigenous languages. The fact that most Indigenous communities in Mexico still have Indigenous language as their first language. It's another element that exists there that represents something. It's a huge, beautiful gift, and at the same time a challenge to build a movement. And there's so many times that we think that uniting Native American Indigenous people would come, just by bringing people together, when there are so many elements to that we still need to figure it out, like language, like different histories, and so it's a constant, right? It's a constant intention. It starts with small things, and as Melissa has said, also with lots of love and finding ways to put culture at the center, because that's a language that brings definitely Indigenous folks and Native American people together. That we've seen that in New York, and we hope to continue to see it. As part of the Peace Summit and this discussion, Sodilia Romero, Zapotec Indigenous leader living in Los Angeles, will be part of this. She couldn't join us today, but she is listening, and obviously she'll be here next Saturday. So we will continue to try to create conditions to figure this out. And I also want to mention that thanks to Jorden and the work of other folks at Black Lives Matter, we were invited to speak at the Black Lives Matter Canada National Conference on November 10th. We haven't told this Melissa, but we really hope to put her on stage and have her talk in Toronto, and on that day, together with our friends here in this show, and see how we can continue to speak with one voice and making this calls. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any other question, any other comment from Annabella, if you can hear me, or Melissa, or any other question from Isabel or Jorden.
I just can say that we need to continue defending the ancient truth that is the heritage of our ancestors left us with much love.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Beautiful conclusion, Annabella. We need to continue honoring our ancient truth, which is the love which we carry our lives in Indigenous communities. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Anabella. Disculpa las fallas técnicas, and we really hope to see you in person in Mexico. Gracias. Thank you very much. Any other comments?
I just want to say thank you to both of you. You both are so incredible, and all the work that you've done has been so impactful. And thank you. You're a role model to young women like me, and I'm just so grateful for all your work. And I'm excited to see how the future holds as we continue this fight of radical love.
Yeah, same. I'm excited to join you all in New York, and I'm looking forward to the Peace Summit next year. And I think it's going to be a, a great conversation. And I'm just excited to share space and just to sort of figure these things out about how our communities can find ways of working and together. And like you said, we have to build relationships, right? That gets so lost, in the work sometimes, that we just don't take the time to really understand each other and to find commonality. And like you said, I mean, these are just very complex, situations. It's just a whole complex, situation in general. So I just think the more dialogue that we can have, the more space that we can share with each other, the better we'll be in the long run.
I just want to remind people that next month, I think it's October 11th, is Indigenous Peoples Day.
Mm-hmm.
We're still trying to, give Columbus Day the axe in the city. So hopefully at some point, if not this year, maybe next year, that can be just done away with. But regardless, we're celebrating. My organization, the North American Indigenous Center of New York, we're having 2 weeks of events starting September 27th and until the 12th of October. And we're going to be posting that soon. And I also want to mention that November is Native American Heritage Month.
Mm-hmm.
So these days and these times are really, I guess, full of different ways you could learn about our culture. Hopefully schools are doing their work, but there's also a lot of events, hopefully hosted by natives.
Mm-hmm.
But some other, institutions will bring natives in. I just want to say to everybody, take the time in that sort of relationship building and learning about each other, and learning first and foremost, whose ever land you're on, go to these. So support them, acknowledge and learn and listen, and carry that with you until it's time to actually develop those relationships. But for all the, Nguehue, all the natives, the indigenous, I just want to say every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. And even if you live a life in the colony, you don't have to fully assimilate, live your truth. you know, like go back into your roots, you know, plant a garden. I don't know, like learn your songs, learn your ceremonies, do whatever you can throughout the year, not just during these months, and reconnect with your power. Yeah, that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And on October 8th, we have New York Land also as part of that celebration. So we will be talking more about that, Melissa. Saturday, October 8th, also New York Land, the celebration of the contributions of Indigenous immigrants in New York City, where Melissa has been part of. And so, yes, again, this year. And I'm just going to close by reminding everyone that next Saturday, November 24th, at 4 p.m. in South Bronx, we're going to come together for the first panel, for the first event in the lead to the Peace Summit. Is incredibly exciting to see your faces. Many of us have never seen each other actually in person, and this is going to be incredibly powerful. And please spread the word. Peace Summit 2023.org and help us promoting this conversation. Put it on your Facebook. We are on YouTube, so also share it with your friends and family. Let's continue this and expand the movement. Thank you very much, Jordan. Thank you very much, Isabella, Melissa. We're honored.